This is Land of Havilah, 2 Chronicles 21, verse 1. Jehoshaphat slept with his fathers and was buried with his fathers in David's city, and Jehoram his son reigned in his place. Comment: the new king Jehoram had multiple wives, as we'll learn coming up. One of them came from the royal family of the northern kingdom. Her name is Athaliah, and she's a disaster, as we find out in the next 3 chapters. Now, speaking of Jehoram, verse 2. He had brothers, the sons of Jehoshaphat, Azariah, Jehiel, Zechariah, Azariah, Michael, and Shephatiah. All these were the sons of Jehoshaphat, king of Israel. Their father gave them great gifts of silver, of gold, and of precious things, with fortified cities in Judah, but he gave the kingdom to Jehoram because he was the firstborn. Now when Jehoram had risen up over the kingdom of his father and had strengthened himself, he killed all his brothers with the sword, and also some of the princes of Israel. Comment: verse 2 just called the deceased Jehoshaphat king of Israel, but in this case that term refers to Judah. He was king of Judah. In verse 2, his son, the new king Jehoram, had at least 6 brothers. In verse 3, the father put them all in powerful positions, made them in charge of various cities, but he made Jehoram first in line to the throne, quote, because he was firstborn, end quote. In verse 4, when Jehoram had strengthened himself, in other words, when he started to get his feet on the ground as king, he killed his brothers and some of the princes, it says, meaning some of the officials in the kingdom. He must have felt they were a threat, but there's no indication they were, or that they did anything to deserve what they got. It'll soon be plain that Jehoram was a long way from trusting Yahweh. Coming up, the origin of this evil, verse 5. Jehoram was 32 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 8 years in Jerusalem. He walked in the way of the kings of Israel, as did Ahab's house, for he had Ahab's daughter as his wife. He did that which was evil in Yahweh's sight. Comment: he acted the way he did, quote, for he had Ahab's daughter as his wife, end quote. His wife's name was Athaliah, 2 Chronicles 22:2. Since Ahab was her father in verse 6, it's likely Jezebel was her mother. If so, she got a double dose of all the wrong stuff from both parents. Yahweh might have destroyed Jehoram sooner, except that, verse 7. However, Yahweh would not destroy David's house because of the covenant that he had made with David, and as he promised to give a lamp to him and to his children always. Comment: Yahweh promised to give David a lamp always, meaning a son on the throne always, 2 Samuel 7:16, which is why Yahweh didn't kill Jehoram any sooner. Coming up, Edom to the southeast has been under the thumb of Judah, but now, verse 8. In his days Edom revolted from under the hand of Judah and made a king over themselves. Then Jehoram went there with his captains and all his chariots with him. He rose up by night and struck the Edomites who surrounded him, along with the captains of the chariots. So Edom revolted from under the hand of Judah to this day. Comment in verses 8 through 10, Edom revolted, which probably means they stopped paying tribute, and definitely they appointed a new king over themselves. So Jehoram took the army down there to re-exert his control, or to try. The Edomites surrounded them and ambushed them in the middle of the night. Jehoram escaped, but he wasn't able to reestablish control, so Edom was a lost cause. Coming up, speaking of Libnah, one of the cities of Judah, still in verse 10. Then Libnah revolted at the same time from under his hand, because he had forsaken Yahweh, the God of his fathers. Comment: one of his own major cities revolted because he forsook Yahweh. Either the citizens of Libnah wanted to remain faithful to Yahweh, or maybe being on the Philistine frontier, they revolted because of their Philistine population. Either way, Yahweh's whittling away at Jehoram's kingdom. Verse 11. Moreover, he made high places in the mountains of Judah, and made the inhabitants of Jerusalem play the prostitute, and led Judah astray. Comment: he made the inhabitants of Jerusalem and Judah play the prostitute, meaning he influenced them or even compelled them to worship other gods. The idea is that Yahweh was Judah's husband, but Judah was unfaithful to Yahweh, like a woman being married to a man but working on the side as a prostitute. Exodus 34:15. All this was during the lifetime of the illustrious prophet Elijah. His ministry was almost totally to the northern kingdom. The next verse is the only mention of him in the Chronicles because he wrote a letter to Jehoram. Verse 12. A letter came to him from Elijah the prophet, saying, Yahweh, the God of David your father, says, because you've not walked in the ways of Jehoshaphat your father, nor in the ways of Asa king of Judah, but have walked in the way of the kings of Israel, and have made Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem to play the prostitute like Ahab's house did, and also have slain your brothers of your father's house, who are better than yourself, behold, Yahweh will strike your people with a great plague, including your children, your wives, and all your possessions, and you'll have great sicknesses with a disease of your bowels, until your bowels fall out by reason of the sickness day by day. Comment in verses 12 to 15, Yahweh says, Jehoram departed from his family's good example and adopted the behavior of his wife's family. Yahweh specifically cited his idolatry and murder, which was all the more enraging to Yahweh because his brothers were better than he was. A plague will be coming on Jehoram's family and possessions, and as for himself, he'll suffer a prolonged and horrendous bowel disorder. As for his possessions and family, verse 16, Yahweh stirred up against Jehoram the spirit of the Philistines and of the Arabians, who are beside the Ethiopians, and they came up against Judah, broke into it, and carried away all the possessions that were found in the king's house, including his sons and his wives, so that there was no son left him except Jehoahaz, the youngest of his sons. Comment, Yahweh spared Jehoram's youngest son. He'll eventually take the throne to continue the line of David. In the meantime, verse 18, after all this, Yahweh struck him in the bowels with an incurable disease. In process of time, at the end of 2 years, his bowels fell out by reason of his sickness, and he died of severe diseases. His people made no burning for him like the burning of his fathers. Comment, bowels falling out sounds like a description of either chronic diarrhea or rectal prolapse, which is literally the rectum falling out or protruding from the anus. In verse 19, he died, and they made no bonfire to recognize his passing as they had for his grandfather, 2 Chronicles 16:14, and perhaps for his father. Verse 20, he was 32 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned in Jerusalem 8 years. He departed without being missed, and they buried him in David's city, but not in the tombs of the kings. Comment, they buried him in David's city, meaning in the old part of the city on the hill called Mount Zion. There's no mention of any inscription on his tomb, but his epitaph in verse 20 is, he departed without being missed, also translated to no one's regret. 2 Chronicles 22 is next.